My mother forgot everyone but me. A Nimmer's story, family stories. By the end, Joan did not know what year it was, or what city she lived in, or the name of the man she'd been married to for 41 years. But when her daughter Susan walked into the room, something in her face would soften, and she would reach out one trembling hand, and she would say the same 4 words she'd been saying for months. "There's my girl." She didn't know Susan was her daughter. She couldn't have told you that. The disease had taken that fact along with 10,000 others. But it had not taken whatever lived underneath the fact. And that, the thing underneath, turned out to be the last thing standing, after everything else had been carried away. This is the story of a woman who forgot the entire world, and the one person her mind refused, to the very end, to let go of. It was not the person anyone expected, least of all her. Before we go any further, if stories like this one tend to stay with you, take a moment to subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. It always means more than you know to see how far these stories travel. You have to understand what Susan believed about herself, or the end of this won't undo you the way it undid her. Susan grew up certain she was the least loved of Joan's 2 daughters. It wasn't paranoia. There was evidence. Her older sister, Diane, was the bright one, the easy one, the one Joan's face lit up for. Diane got the warmth. Susan got the instructions. Diane was praised. Susan was corrected. Their mother was a hard woman. Capable, proud, sparing with affection, and what little softness she had seemed to flow toward Diane as naturally as water finding the low place. So Susan did what the unloved feeling child often does. She became useful. If she couldn't be adored, she could be needed. She was the one who remembered the doctor's appointments and fixed the leaking sink and called on Sunday nights. And somewhere deep down she made a quiet, lifelong peace with a sad little fact, that she loved her mother more than her mother loved her, and that was just how it was going to be. She carried that for 40 years. She was wrong about it the entire time, but she would not find that out until her mother had almost completely disappeared. The diagnosis came when Joan was 73. Alzheimer's. And it was Susan, of course it was Susan, who stepped in. Diane, the favorite, lived far away, and was busy, and found the whole thing too painful to witness, and so visited rarely and left early. The adored child could not bear it. The overlooked one moved in. So Susan had a front row seat to the cruelest thing she had ever watched. She watched her mother be erased, one piece at a time. It goes in a particular order, this disease, though the order is different for everyone. First, Joan lost the recent things. Where she'd put her glasses. What she'd had for lunch. Then she lost larger things. What year it was, who the president was, the fact that her own mother had been dead for decades. She'd ask for her, sometimes, and Susan would have to decide all over again whether to break her heart with the truth or let her live in a kinder year. Then it came for the people. She forgot her friends. She forgot the neighbors she'd known for 30 years. One terrible afternoon, she looked at her husband of 41 years, the man asleep in the chair beside her, and asked Susan, politely, who the gentleman was and when he would be leaving. And then, and this is the part Susan was not prepared for, she forgot Diane. The favorite, the bright one, the daughter she had adored so openly that it had quietly broken her other daughter's heart for 40 years. Diane came to visit, and Joan smiled at her the way you smile at a kind stranger, and asked if she was one of the nurses. Diane left that day and did not come back for a long time. There are some things the favored child cannot survive either. And Susan sat in the wreckage of her mother's mind and waited, with a grief she was ashamed of, for the day her mother would forget her too. It never came. Here is what Susan started to notice, as the rest of the world fell away. Her mother was disappearing into the past. That's where the disease takes you, backward, down the years. And the further back Joan traveled, the more she seemed to land in one particular place. A place from long, long ago. She began to talk to Susan as if Susan were small. She'd fuss about whether she was warm enough. She'd tell her to drink her broth, to rest, that the doctor said she had to rest. And one night, when Susan sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted, her mother reached up with both hands and smoothed the hair back from her grown daughter's forehead, slowly, tenderly, the way you do for a child with a fever, and began, softly, to sing. It was a lullaby, an old one Susan had not heard in 40 years and had genuinely, completely forgotten. And as her mother sang it, smoothing her hair, the forgotten thing came back to Susan all at once. When Susan was 7 years old, she had nearly died. She had forgotten this. Children are merciful that way. But she had been very sick for a very long time. Months in a hospital bed, a fever that wouldn't break, a year the doctors weren't sure she'd survive. And her mother, her hard, sparing, undemonstrative mother, had not left her side. Not for one night. For months. Joan had sat in a hospital chair and smoothed her daughter's hair back from her burning forehead and sung her that lullaby into the dark, over and over, bargaining with God for the life of her second child. Susan survived. And once she was well, life resumed, and her mother packed all that terror and all that tenderness away somewhere deep and went back to being the capable, undemonstrative woman she'd always been. The hospital was never spoken of again. Susan grew up and forgot it entirely, and remembered only the corrections, the instructions, the coolness, and built her whole sense of herself on a foundation that left out the most important fact of all. Her mother had once sat in the dark for months and refused to let her go. And now, at the very end of her life, with her magnificent mind stripped down to its final, deepest layer, with everything else carried off, the husband and the friends and the years, and even the adored older daughter, this was what remained. Not Diane, the sick child, the frightened nights, the hand on the fevered forehead, the one she'd almost lost. That was the bedrock. That was the thing the disease could not reach, because it was buried deeper than anything else in her, deeper than her own name. Underneath 40 years of hardness, underneath a lifetime of a love that didn't know how to show itself, the truest thing in Joan, the very last thing, was the night she fought to keep her second daughter alive. She forgot the whole world. She could not forget the child she'd nearly lost. Susan had spent her entire life waiting to hear that her mother loved her, waiting for words that never came, from a woman who didn't have them to give. She got her answer at the very end, and not in words. She got it in the fact that when her mother's mind became a house with only one room left, Susan was the one standing in it. "There's my girl," her mother would say, not knowing her name, not knowing she was her daughter, knowing only, in the one place the disease couldn't touch, that this was the face she had once refused to let the dark take. "There's my girl." She'd been saying it all along. For 40 years. Susan just hadn't known the language. In the last weeks, Joan spoke less and less, and then hardly at all. But she still reached for Susan's hand. Even when the words were gone, even when her eyes had trouble finding the room, her hand would search the blanket until it found her daughter's, and hold on. The very last reflex of a vanishing mind. Hold on to this one. Whatever else you let go, hold on to this one. Susan would sit with her and smooth the hair back from her mother's forehead now, returning the gesture across 50 years, and sing her the lullaby. And her mother's face would settle into peace. At the end, we are reduced to what we loved most. The disease is merciless, but it is also, in its way, a terrible kind of honesty. It burns off everything that isn't essential and leaves you holding only the one thing that was always truest. For Joan, after everything, that one thing was Susan, the daughter who thought she was the least loved. She was the last thing her mother forgot, which is another way of saying she was the thing her mother loved most, so deeply, so far down, that not even the disease that took everything else could find the bottom of it. Some people never get to hear the words. But if you are paying attention, if you are very, very lucky, you might get to see, just once, what was underneath them all along. If she stayed with you tonight, don't let her leave alone. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and the person whose love you almost missed. I read every single one. Some stories never leave.